Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's conversation on the topic suffering and incarnation. So we're going to be talking about why is it that we have suffering in our lives? Is it something that we need? Does that help us in any way? Will this ever end, this cycle where we have to reincarnate and go through challenges? And we're going to answer these questions and a few others in light of the Spiritist teaching, like the Spiritist philosophy teachings. And we hope to address also how is it that we can find the strength to endure any sufferings that we might need to go through. So before we start, we always like to concentrate and connect with ourselves, calm our thoughts, connect with our guides, the spiritual guides of the Paul Stephen Spiritist Center, and ask them to help us, inspire us, so we can discuss and learn in this next 30 minutes, and we can truly apprehend what we are discussing. Thank you. Now that we are to get connected through our thoughts and with the higher spirits that support us, let's dive into the topics. But I would like to say that I'm using as reference the Spirit's book and Heaven and Hell, which is also one of the basic books of the Spiritist philosophy. This particular book is divided into two sessions, and we're going to be looking at two parts. We're going to be looking at part 2. It's an interesting book for those who don't know it, because Kardec actually evoked some spirits to ask them questions about their lives. And these were known spirits, and they could answer how they were in the spiritual world, and they would make a comparison if how they lived had an influence on what was happening after their body died. So let's start first with question 258 from the Spirit's book. And question 258 from the Spirit's book, Kardec asked the spirits, and I'll read. While in an errant state and before a new corporeal existence, does a spirit have the awareness and foresight of what will happen to it during its new lifetime? What do you guys think? Before we incarnate in the spiritual world, do we know what we are going to go through in the next lifetime? So the spirits answer Kardec in this question 258. The spirit itself chooses the kinds of trial it will undergo. Its free will consists in doing so. So once we developed our intelligence, we also got our free will. So as we developed intelligence in our evolutionary process, we have more and more the ability to choose with more and more freedom. So we can compare that to a parent and a child. So when the child is very young and can't make any sensible choices for themselves, the parent will step in and will help the child make choices and slowly give the child the opportunity to make their own choices so they can learn and they can grow. So with us, it's the same thing. So our reincarnation in the past, when we were primitive beings, the spirits would help us, or our consciousness was still in developing the early phases. The spirits would help us plan our reincarnation. However, as we mature as spirits, we get the opportunity to choose what we're going to go through based on what we need to develop. And we're going to see the why we choose a certain kind of challenge or difficulty. We're going to see soon. Okay, we're going to see with the why. The other question that was very interesting that Kardec asked the spirits was in regards to how long are we going to have to continue suffering before this ends. And he asked that in question 268. And the question is this: until it reaches the state of perfect purity, does a spirit have to constantly undergo trials? So we know from the Spirit's book that there's a classification. It's a spectrum, but they classified in groups of spirits, ascending. So you have the simple and more ignorant spirits until the pure spirits or the higher spirits. And he said, will we still have to undergo trials until we reach this purity? And by purity, if you look in the Spirit's book, they define a pure spirit, a spirit that doesn't need to incarnate anymore. They are very, very aligned with the Creator in the sense of contributing. They don't have anything else within them that will be detrimental to themselves, to the others, and to creation. And that's even in the level of thought, in the level of intention. So these pure spirits, they don't need to incarnate and they don't need to undergo suffering. But he wanted to know if before we reach that, if we had to go through undergo trials. And the spirits answered, yes. But, and an important but they are not as you understand them. You call material tribulations trials. Even though it may not yet be perfect, a spirit who reaches a certain degree does not have to go under any more trials or doesn't have to endure any more trials. However, it always has non-suffering duties that consisting in helping others to improve themselves. These, in turn, will help it evolve further. So like the spirits told Kardec in regards to our purpose, why we reincarnate, why we have cycles of incarnations, and the spirit said that there's two purposes. One is to evolve, and the other is to contribute to creation. So there's a point where we are developing ourselves, helping others, and in that way we're contributing, isn't it, to society and to creating a better place for all of us. But as we grow as spirit and progress and really align ourselves with the divine laws, then less and less we have to undergo trials, to a point where he says you don't have to be a pure spirit, but there's a certain point where you don't have to suffer anymore. However, you will have duties that doesn't involve suffering, that he says non-suffering duties, which consists of helping others. And as a consequence, that will have an influence in yourself, in your development as well. So that's good news for us, isn't it? Now, why is it that we suffer? Is it because of something that we did in a past life? We tend to put everything into one box, and that is not a reality. So let's have a look at the whys we might be suffering or undergoing suffering or challenges. Now that we know that there is a point where all this is going to end, and that after that, we're going to just be contributing. But we're going to see something important, that when we're on a mission, what happens. So in the Spirit's book, the Spirits clarify that there are two kind of places where you can find the cause for our suffering. And he says, causes from this life, something that you did in this life that causes the suffering. And causes can be found outside of the current life. And it's interesting that he didn't say in your past life, he said outside of the current life. And we're going to look at that. So causes from this life would be consequences of our choices. Say, if we make unhealthy choices for ourselves, that will affect and that will have a consequence in this life, and it might be in a form of suffering. And I'll give an example, and this example can be found in the book Heaven and Hell, in the second part, when they're interviewing the spirits, and this spirit's name was Joseph. And Joseph, he when he talked to Allan Kardec and his team, he explained that in a previous life, he had been born in a family of wealth, like he had financial comfort, he was intelligent, he was healthy. So he had everything for his incarnation to progress well. However, he truly abused of this in his life. He made choices that weren't, despite support from family and from the spiritual world, he decided to really do things in a way that were detrimental to his health. And at the age of 30, he became vision impaired in that life. And he was incredibly upset, he was revolted, he was angry, and he blamed everyone, but he couldn't see that he was the one responsible. That wasn't in his reincarnation plan, but he brought that by the way he lived. So that's a consequence to something that we do in one life that causes suffering that life. Another cause from this life is our ignorance. So if we take the example of Joseph, when he lost his vision and he became angry, he became angry at everyone around him, he started blaming people. So these came out of his ignorance because he couldn't understand that he was the one causing the problems. Sorry, he was the one causing the problem. My English isn't very good. I've been speaking too much Portuguese. So the other aspect of ignorance, even if people believe that there's a creator, there's a God, it might even cause them to think that God doesn't like them. Say they're going through a suffering, but they don't really truly understand the divine laws and the processes of nature to help us develop into true human beings. And they take that as if it was something that it truly isn't. They're still in the mentality of punishment and reward system, which is not how the universe operates. So our ignorance, when a suffering comes, we might, like Joseph, might blame, we might be angry. So we also might have self-doubt. We might think that we're not loved. We might think that we were abandoned by God. We were not loved by God specifically. So there's all of this other added suffering to the existing suffering, just because we're ignorant of the processes in nature and in life to move us to where our true happiness is. So these two causes can be found in this lifetime. You probably didn't plan for that. However, maybe with what we're going to discuss here today, and if my brain allows, if it connects properly, we will find a way to understand these aspects, and that will help us at least avoid this extra layer of blame, shame, and anger and hopelessness. Sometimes people feel hopeless because they don't know that there's something taking care of them. Now, what about outside of this life? So there are causes from a past life. Let's get the example of Joseph. And Joseph, after he passed away from that lifetime, he went in profound suffering because he started to understand that it was actually his fault and it wasn't anyone else's fault. And he had behaved in a very difficult manner. And so what he did was he started learning in the spiritual world and preparing himself for his next life. And in his next life, he chose to come with a vision, not to come, like to develop a vision impairment around the age of 20. And he wanted just to developed that strength in himself, and he had actions in his past life that had the consequence that might have affected his eyes in the spiritual body, in the paraspiritual body, not in his spirit, but in the paraspiritual body, that would reflect in his next lifetime. So he went through, he even decided to, after a few years, become hearing impaired as well. And he was very successful in that incarnation because he wasn't ignorant anymore, like we discussed. He knew, he studied the divine laws, he understood the mechanism. So when he came, although we forget, but that was deeply rooted in his heart. So he would have a sense that everything was the way it's supposed to happen. And he went through his life, although it was a very difficult life, but he had a successful incarnation in that opportunity. So sometimes suffering might come from a past life and might come from a reincarnation plan, which we talked about right now. So what is a reincarnation plan? In the books from Andre Luis by the medium Francisco Xavier, Chico Xavier, for those who know him as that, he talks about how the life of the spirits are in the spiritual world. And he tells us that there is a department when someone's going to incarnate, there's a department called the Department of Reincarnation. And in this place, a team of spirits come together with you, like question 258 said, that we actually choose the trials, but we have assistance of spirits that, for example, have a profound knowledge of human psyche and of physical bodies. So we can tailor the incarnation, the body, what we're going to undergo, so we can progress quicker and we can truly move in the direction where we are going to grow and develop. So when we do this reincarnation, just out of curiosity, one of the books, he says that when we do this plan, sometimes we want to take more. We think we're going to be able to do more than we actually do. And I was commenting this with some friends, and they said, yeah, even when we travel abroad, isn't it? We think that we're going to be able to do so many things. And when we get there, we can't do half of the things that we planned. So with our reincarnation, sometimes it's similar, but the spirits that are there assisting us, they will help us cut down on the things that we add because we think that we're going to be able to do all that. So the incarnation is tailored so we can have the best chance of success. That is very important. The spirits are always working with us so we can have the best chance of succeeding. And by succeeding is succeeding according to the moral development and the intellectual development that we need to grow as human beings. So causes found outside of this life can be from a past life, from a reincarnation plan. And this reincarnation plan, it isn't, for example, just, oh, I did something and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have this kind of suffering so I can learn. No, it's to avoid a mistake. Say you have a pattern that has been repeating incarnation after incarnation, and you want to correct that because you want to get over with that. So you identify that maybe perhaps you should have, say, go through more financial struggle so you can learn to value money and your time, and you can develop discipline and determination. So you might, because you made some mistakes in that area. It might be that you made some mistakes physically. And physically, I say, by doing things that are unhealthy for you, and you want to correct that. So you might have something, for example, a mental impairment or something that, an illness in your body. And that is part of you trying to shift your behavior from a pattern into a better pattern. And it doesn't have to do with something that you did in a past life necessarily in the sense that that's the consequence, but it's you planning that that is the best way to go. So you can step out of that pattern. I've mentioned this in another video, to develop a virtue as well in your reincarnation plan. Maybe you think, okay, now I know how to have faith in the difficult times. So you might plan a couple of virtues that you want to develop. Say you want to develop charity, you want to develop faith, not develop, but have the certainty that this, to an extent, is well developed or is developing as you have planned. But to develop faith or to develop the ability to forgive, you have to undergo some sort of situation where you have to, for example, in the case of faith, trust the divine providence. And that normally comes in the form of suffering, in a form of a difficulty or a challenge. And when you're in the situation, you can't see that that's what you're supposed to develop, is your understanding that there was a plan that you made, and there's something here that you are learning in that process, or you are developing a virtue or testing that, putting to proof that you have somewhat developed that virtue. Okay, so it might not be, like I said, everything from something that you did in a past life. Also, because in our when we're progressing in our journey, we might plateau, we might stop. We can never go backwards. That's what the Spirit said. You can never go backwards in our development, but we can stay stationary. And sometimes we need a little nudge. And when we're planning our incarnation, because we notice that, say, in the past lives, we haven't moved as we wanted to move forward. So you might put in some sort of challenge that might cause suffering to move you forward, to make you move and develop as a person. And also there's a beautiful story from another why you might endure suffering in a lifetime, which is out of when you love someone very much. And you don't have to undergo suffering, but you know that they're going to incarnate, and this person that you love is going to go through difficult challenges and suffering in their lives, because that's part of their reincarnation plan. But out of love, you decide to be born close to that person and endure those suffering with the person so you can support them. And that's the story of, also in the book Heaven and Hell, of Victor Leblouf, maybe. It's part 2, chapter 2. His name is Victor. And he says that he died at the age of 20 in this incarnation when he was talking to Allan Kardec and the team. And during his life, his short life, he was dedicated to supporting his mother. Since a very young age, he started working because he didn't want his mom to undergo so many difficulties that she did. And he didn't have a father figure that helped him to support the mom and to support him. So he took on that role, and he helped this mother that he loved so much. But when it came the time for him to depart, to go back to the spiritual world, he really wanted his mother to be taken care of. So because of that, intuitively, he worked nonstop. So he didn't have time to do things that a normal teenager or young adult would do, because he had that in him that he wanted to support his mom. And when the time came, we can see how he was a very intuitive and higher spirit, because he felt that it might be his time. So he told his mom, perhaps you should rest, because I think I'm going to rest too. And maybe you can sleep a little bit. I can see you're tired. I have everything okay, everything cared for. And the mom said, oh, yeah. And she slept, and he went to sleep as well. And she had a dream that day that she was in complete darkness. And then she saw this little beautiful speck of light, and it started coming in her direction. And when it was very close, she noticed it was her son. And she felt that warm love coming to her heart. And she saw this ball of light moving up to the sky. And in the dream, she knew that her son was going to pass away. And when she woke up and he did pass away, some friends that were followers of the Spiritist philosophy and who knew this boy and knew how he was such an ethical person, such dedicated and caring for his mother, they decided to help this lady, Victor's mom. And Kardec decided to invoke him as a spirit to tell how his afterlife was doing, because they knew what happened in his life. And Victor shared with Kardec and his team that he was very, very happy. Like he was in a very good place. Everything worked really well. He loved his mother very much, and he came to assist her, but his time had come and he had fulfilled his reincarnation plan. So he was really, really happy, but he asked people to support his mother because she would still have to undergo many challenges in that lifetime. And he wouldn't be able to be there physically, just perhaps at a distance. Beautiful story, isn't it? So some people come and they are okay, and they don't see that as a suffering, because this young person, he didn't complain. He knew that was part of his intuitively, he knew. So these are some of the causes, but there's also one other that we sometimes don't think of, the why we suffer. Life is a continuum where sometimes in the spiritual world, sometimes incarnated, spiritual world incarnated. But this period between one incarnation and another, whatever it is that we do in that part of our lives also has a consequence that might show up in our life. So depending on how we are in the spiritual world, what we're doing, that might influence in our current life, and that might constitute a why outside of our current life that might be bringing us suffering. So just very quickly recapping, the spirits tell us that there's two sources, let's say, causes that are within our life, the current life, and causes that are outside of the current life, of this life that we're living. And like you saw, it's not only because of something that you did in a past life. Oh, and I forgot to say about mission, because mission is rare. It might be that a spirit comes on a mission and they will undergo suffering. They probably won't see it like we see it. They will undergo to set an example and to teach, because through these opportunities, they will be able to demonstrate how to behave and to bring the teachings backed up with lived like reality. So they model what we have to do. Okay, so these are the ones that I decided to bring, the whys we suffer. So we know the whys, and we know that once we start understanding the why, it makes it easier for us to make sense of what we're going through. And we also know, which is really good, that it's not going to last forever. In a certain point of our lives, we will not have to go through suffering as we know it. We will have duties that are non-suffering duties, which is to help others and progress and develop, and that will help us. So it will walk hand in hand with our development as well. And finally, how can we find the strength to endure? What are the tools? And we have discussed that many, many times, in different people would have brought that up as well. So the first that I already talked about is knowledge. If we have a better understanding of reality, it's more likely that we can endure suffering because we have an understanding. If we find a meaning to life, isn't it? There's even a line of psychology that talks about finding a meaning, and as a way to help people walk through or endure the suffering that they're undergoing. The other is meditation, prayer, and these can be done anywhere, any place, at any time. It's that true connection with the divinity, with our spiritual mentors and guides. And it's important to remember that we have a spiritual mentor, that his task in this life, he's already in the non-suffering, probably the non-suffering end of the spectrum, where he comes to help us progress. And as a consequence, they progress as well. So our spiritual mentor is always with us, and we can always ask for their help, their inspiration, their insights into what we need to do. And when we're feeling sad or we are feeling lost, we can ask them to show us an answer if we can't feel the intuition in a dream, perhaps. So speaking to our spiritual mentor through prayer, and prayer is a mental connection to a higher being or to higher forms of energy or to the Creator itself, to God. So these are the tools that I brought for us. I hope, and what I had to say about suffering and incarnation. So we know that we do have to undergo still suffering. And we saw the whys, and the why might just be a choice to just progress quicker or to not, to step out of a pattern. Doesn't necessarily have to do with our past misbehavior, let's put it this way. Not directly, at least. And it's also important to remember that the spirits are always working with us 100% of the time, so we can have the best outcome that we can possibly have in this life. They're constantly inspiring us, but we do have our free will and we can make our choices. So I hope you all make very wise choices and you can fulfill your reincarnation plan, even if we don't remember it. So thank you very much. And I'll finalize just with us vibrating love to this planet and to the people, because we're going through several different challenges at the moment. And there are many people going through suffering that might not know what we just discussed here today. And they might be feeling lost because they think that they don't understand the purpose of all, because they're in that moment of pain. So if you want to join me and imagine that from our hearts, we connect with our mentors and the higher mentors and the spirits that work towards the betterment of the planet and human race. And we ask them to take this small contribution of ours to help the people in need around the world, to touch the hearts of those who are governing so they can make the right choices, so they can avoid future suffering for others and for themselves. Truly touch their hearts. Also, people of influence, touch their hearts so they can send the right message. They can make the right choices as well. We also vibrate for all of those that we love. And finally, we vibrate for ourselves. May we contribute as much as we can to the people around us and to our own development and well-being. So be it. Thank you. Thank you guys very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.